Welcome to part 4 of our Sofia World's Motion Breakdown series here on the Indian Debating League. My name is Krishaang, and welcome back. Um, Once again, I do apologize if I'm not as high energy today because I'm not feeling great. Uh, but we chug on, and the type of motion that we're going to be breaking down today is related to retrospective truth value. While this may seem like an IR motion, I really don't think, I mean, there are IR elements to it, but I don't think that those are like the most important elements to this motion. So, we'll be going over what the motion is. We'll be going over some useful spec that, if you know, can really benefit your case making. But then we will be going more over the burdens of this type of motion, the two very different burdens that people assume uh, are enforced by this motion, and then we'll see how we can best fill those burdens. All right. So the motion is this house believes that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's rise to power has been good for Saudi Arabia, and as far as I'm aware, at least this motion did not have a context like. So when you see this motion, the first thing that you should be realizing is that it's a THBT motion, and also it's a retrospective motion because this is in the past tense. Has been good for Saudi Arabia. So if we try to divide these two burdens, we can say that first, this is a truth value motion. Gov must prove that the statement is true. And just for clarity's sake, when I say that Gov must prove that a statement is true, I mean this statement. I mean Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's rise has been good for Saudi Arabia. Anything that comes after the THBT is something that side government needs to prove is true, while op needs to prove it's false or at the very least not true. So Gov needs to say that yes, MBS's has been good for Saudi Arabia, which presumably means that it has led to benefits for Saudi Arabia. The second burden, as I explained, is that this is a retrospective motion. So it's not, and here I've written primarily because I do think that the likelihood of future harms and future benefits is a part of this debate. So, but I don't think that that is this debate. So, I don't think this motion is primarily about proving the likelihood of future harms or future benefits. It is more about attempting to convince the judge that you know, or it is reasonable for them to believe that it has already led to certain harms or benefits. And here I will add the nuance that when I do say that like the likelihood of future proving future harms and benefits can be a part of this motion, I mean that setting up your country to benefit in the future is also a benefit right now. Even if I'm not able to extract any kind of like let's say um I have an exam coming up, and I spend 2 hours today studying for that exam. So that maybe did not give me any short-term benefits. And if I am debating this motion at night, that this house believes that uh, the 2 hours of studying has been good for Krishaang, uh, then maybe you might have an urge to exclude the fact. I mean, not in this motion because it's too like not in the studying motion because I think it's too relatable. But the idea is the same, which is that you might have an urge to exclude the fact that these 2 hours of studying are a benefit because they are putting you in a better position to be able to access the benefits of being able to score well in an exam, um, pass your courses, get your degree, all of that kind of stuff. So even if MBS has been able to position his country to be able to benefit in the future or to be able to get harmed in the future, I think the positioning and his specific role in that positioning is something that's important. There's one more nuance that I do want to add here, which is related to the rise. And this is something that you'll see is common in a lot of debating motions, where you will see that there is a mention of a rise. So, what does this mean? This specifically means that he was in a less powerful position earlier and he became powerful more, of course. But what it also means is that this motion is not just ascertaining or determining the impact that MBS has had on Saudi Arabia. It is ascertaining the impact of the phenomenon of his rise. And when you do talk about the rise of MBS, there are many things that are involved in that rise that are not just MBS. So, what else do you mean by the rise of MBS? What are the various factors surrounding him that have that are at odds with what Saudi Arabia kind of used to be like? So, even and this is smart because especially on closing teams, you can when the opening has dried up a lot of the actor analysis and stuff, you can explain that this specific rise to power, for example, just showing that slightly more conservative, slightly more liberal, and a more young leader can rise to power is something that is useful for the country or is something that is detrimental for the country. Or you could explain that the way that his rise happened is something that is detrimental for the country because it's setting a negative precedence and all of that kind of stuff. So you can have arguments on both sides talking about the phenomenon of his rise and not necessarily him as a personality. But what is the personality of MBS? And without talking too much about the psychological aspect, I do also want to talk about some useful spec knowledge that if you have is going to help you in argument formation. So the first is that Saudi governance and royal succession before MBS used to ironically not be as authoritarian. So what do I mean by this? Uh, there was when you have how to explain this? The perception that exists around Saudi Arabia is that in Saudi Arabia is something similar to some sort of an absolute dictatorship where the king does anything that he wants and no one can stop him. And maybe to an extent that is or was true. But what used to happen in Saudi Arabia is that you used to have a lot of internal discussions and bargaining inside the House of Saud. So, as I mentioned here, the succession itself largely moved brother to brother among the sons of Abdul Aziz. But what also happened is that there were councils inside the House of Saud, and I mean, no, councils is maybe a strong word, but there were blocks inside the House of Saud, and the idea was that you would attempt to, uh, even if you were the absolute leader, you would attempt to ensure that most people in your royal family are happy, and they wouldn't necessarily express their happiness through supporting you overtly, but they could express that happiness through docileness or docility. I don't know what the right word is, but by acquiescing, by being quiescent to the things that you potentially want to do, and not really creating much of a barrier between you and the policies that you want to execute. In 2006, because there was a lot of concerns around the existence of potential succession crises due to precedents. There was an allegiance council that was made, and the point was to formalize succession management. Um, but the idea is, and this is what I'm trying to explain to you, is that these the key portfolios in the country, uh, the ones that held the maximum amount of power, but also the ones that led to the maximum is maybe a wrong word because there are other sources of funding, but the ones that led to the more secure sources of funding for the House of Saud traditionally sat with different branches. So you still ended up having, even though there's no real or wasn't any strict democracy in Saudi Arabia, there was still different branches that had some level of decentralization of power. So you may think that defense and interior and national guard to a certain extent cover the same portfolios, but there was a very like strict delineation of what each of these individual branches is supposed to do. Secondly, let's talk about the social contract. So the social contract that and this is what I kind of covered in the first spec also. When we talk about the social contract, we're very used to a democratic social contract where you give up a lot of your freedoms and you get rights in exchange. In Saudi Arabia, you don't really get rights in exchange, but you do get security and you do get a bunch of it's the same old dictatorship democracy debate. But the idea is that the more that the government and the House of Saud was able to do for the public and for the most important oligarchs in the public, such as when they made money through oil, they funded subsidies for new businesses, getting more public sector employment and giving government jobs to more people, giving more welfare to the poor people in Saudi Arabia. All of this they gave in exchange for, again, docility, in exchange for quiescence, in exchange for not being super revolutionary and not creating barriers between the king and the policy that he wanted to execute. Also, what's important to note here is that the social contract is specifically called a rentier social contract here, uh, because and again, may be wrong about this, but the reason that we call it a rentier social contract is because uh, the the extent of the benefits that the state gives you are proportional to your power within the state, which is not something that we're used to in a democracy. I mean, practically, we're quite used to it. We know that billionaires get like a lot more leeway and a lot of benefits out of the state. But legally, if you live in a democratic country, it is likely that you and the billionaire have an equivalent legal status. If anything, it is likely that you have a better legal status and are a potential beneficiary of a higher number of on-paper government policies than billionaires. That's not true for Saudi Arabia. But what happened was in the 2010s, there was a decline in the per barrel price of oil, uh, and this basically led to, it didn't directly lead to the creation of Vision 2030, but it led to the idea in Saudi Arabia that we can't really continue to depend on oil forever. And of course, this was not a new idea. Global warming and fossil fuels weren't invented in the 2010s. People had already discovered these phenomena earlier. But it really made it quite evident because uh, the coffers of Saudi Arabia were not necessarily drying up, but they were unable to have the extent of oil in their reserves that they wanted to have, because they had to sell a lot of it in order to be able to run all the same things that they wanted to. Also, this is one of the reasons that there started to be a VAT, a value added tax in Saudi Arabia in 2018. Again, if you live in a democracy, you're probably used to paying a value added tax on most goods and services that you buy. But this is not a burden that Saudi citizens had to bear until quite recently. Also, subsidies became more, more, more the government became more tight-handed when it came to giving out subsidies, and it started to be a little bit more austere in its spending on already powerful people, because this money, whatever money they were able to make, was already quite mitigated. But also, they really wanted to funnel this money into Vision 2030, as we will discuss. But I also want to talk just a little bit about the religious establishment and the extent of social control. So here, what would be quite useful to know is the difference between uh, the Shias, the Sunnis, and the Wahhabis, and the real philosophical difference between these three branches of Islam. I mean, okay, let's just call them three separate branches for the time being. But what I do want to note here is that the stereotypes about Saudi Arabia were potentially at least a little bit true, in the sense that religion and religious morality was, and still is to a very large extent, a major pillar of state stability. And this is also another way that they were able to ensure that the public remained quiescent and a little bit docile and did not start revolution after revolution. Uh, these religious powers that a lot of different institutions in Saudi Arabia had ended up getting curtailed in 2016. So they were able to take less action against people that they believed were guilty of religious crime. A big example that's quite majorly cited around the world is women have been allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia since June 2018, which is quite a big deal as far as as Saudi Arabia goes. But also, there's been more opening of the entertainment sector. So cinemas that did not used to exist in Saudi Arabia, because there are certain interpretations of Islam that believe many forms of art and entertainment to be haram. Uh, Cinemas came back in 2018, and now there are many, many large stadium events. I mean, if you're a WWE fan, you probably know that there have been many WWE events in Saudi Arabia. If you're a gaming fan, or even if you're a chess fan, honestly, you'd know that the Esports World Cup is conducted in Saudi Arabia now. So there is a certain level of change in terms of the relative importance of religious conservatism, which has maybe gone down. However, this does not mean that the state has suddenly become a democracy or super liberal, because um, the, while women were getting the right to drive, in fact, just a few months before this right to drive was announced for women in 2018, there was a woman who was convicted to many, many years of imprisonment because she was guilty of driving, a female activist. And this was a very common thing even after, and especially after MBS's rise to power, where the people who were trying to mobilize against the government, or are trying to voice dissent and stuff, were asymmetrically cracked down upon. Of course, it's not like Saudi Arabia had always been very, very nice and friendly with its dissentees. But I mean, I don't think I know this that this is something that went up uh, after 2018, after 2016 actually. Now let's talk about Vision 2030, because I think that this is one of the most important things that you should know, even if you don't know any of this other spec about the tiny nuances of tokenistic changes. Not always tokenistic. I mean, I should give Saudi credit where it's due, but very minimal changes in the rights that women have on paper and stuff. Even if you don't know this and you don't know the internal um, power dynamics in the House of Saud and how they've changed, you should know about Vision 2030. So, what is Vision 2030? Vision 2030 is the flagship national strategy for diversification, private sector expansion, and reduced oil dependence. As I was trying to explain earlier, Saudi realized that they couldn't rely on oil forever, and therefore they decided to funnel a large amount of money into being ready for a post-oil world, and into being relevant in a world where isolationism couldn't sustain you. If you were a purely oil driven economy, as a lot of Gulf countries were throughout the late 1900s, mid to late 1900s actually, they were able to continue to exist in a more isolationist way without needing to depend on other countries or interact with other countries too much, and therefore were also able to preserve their cultures to a decent extent. But now it is not really a high possibility, because when you reduce your dependence on oil, you're forced to diversify into various other industries. And when you are just diversifying into different industries, you're a new player in those industries. But there are other countries that already exist and are quite dominant in those industries. So, interactions with those countries, with the top companies in those countries and stuff, is something that's completely inevitable. And this is something that Saudi kind of capitalized on. They decided, at least in the interim, that tourism is a brilliant way to be able to make money. So, for example, Neom, if you've seen that big, long, massive, long city, and various other things, like building massive statues and all of that kind of stuff. Uh, I mean, way more than that, honestly, more than building massive statues. Like, there have been significant infrastructure investments. Saudi Arabia is basically a trial ground for any new hospitality technology that comes out of the east of China and stuff, because they want to give it first. Uh, Hotels in Saudi Arabia are considered to be among the best in the world, and all of that stuff. They've been trying to anglicize their country. They've changed the languages on lots of road signs and stuff. Not changed, but at least added English and generalized it. And they're trying their best to be able to gain money from tourism, but that's tourism is not the end game. The end game is to be able to diversify into various sectors, to be able to use your current money to um, kickstart growth of, of companies in all of these sectors. And what this does is that it creates new sectors for your economy that did not really exist. I mean, let's just take something really random, okay? Um, Horticulture. Okay, let's take horticulture. Horticulture was not a very popular sector in Saudi Arabia for very obvious reasons. Because Saudi Arabia is kind of like Arrakis. So, horticulture was not something that was very popular in Saudi Arabia. It was not something that was very important for Saudi Arabia either. But now, when Saudi Arabia starts to enter the field of horticulture, and it sees other countries like, I don't know, Japan and India that are already at the forefront of, and China, of course, at the forefront of this field, they have to interact with these countries, make deals with these countries. And while they do that, they invest a lot of money into their own indigenous horticulture system. What this looks like is maybe, I don't know, building more greenhouses and building like long distance irrigation facilities and all of that kind of stuff, like stacked greenhouses and artificial lighting and humidified, moisturized indoor environments and all that stuff. Um, while doing this, they have also been able to get tangential benefits in other sectors, but also they've created a sector that never used to exist. And the thing is, the way Saudi Arabia is doing this is they are experimenting with a lot of different sectors, even if they don't have an immediate payoff. Like, it is very tough for an average person to be able to see a significant economic payoff that horticulture could have. But there are many countries in the world that are banking on the fact that uh, the, the number of species that get extinct periodically is increasing as society goes on and as time goes on. And if this is true, then scarcity of species and diversification of species, even plant species, is something that's I mean, not diversification, but scarcity is something that's really likely to happen, which means that it is quite likely that there will be certain countries that will end up having monopolies on species as a whole, on certain plants that only they are able to grow and stuff like that. And there are some measures against this kind of monopolization, even if they're not intended to be against this. For example, there's a seed bank in Norway, I think. I might be wrong here, but it's called, I think, the Svalbard Seed Bank or something like that. Again, feel free to correct me if you know the real name. Where which is actually intended in case of a nuclear apocalypse or some other kind of major apocalypse, to preserve as many plant species from around the world that they can. But the idea is that Saudi Arabia is also a country that is investing in this. And they're investing in many different fields, even if they can't see the probabilities of these sectors ending up being beneficial, being very, very high. They believe that putting their eggs in as many different baskets as possible and creating as many sectors as possible in the short term is something that's likely to be good. In the long term, maybe the weaker sectors will get whittled out, or the unnecessary sectors will get whittled out. That is something that Saudi Arabia is okay with, because at least they will have other sectors to rely on, and they won't be in the position that they were when they got this shock quite recently that, oh my god, oil won't last forever. That was a bit of a detour, but I do think that Vision 2030 is very important. And the reason that Vision 2030 is very important is because there are many types of motions from many different themes that will incorporate some elements of Vision 2030. So, whenever there's a motion about a country trying to do some sort of economic diversification, whether it's a developing or a developed country, um, whether it's a motion about isolation versus globalization, whether it's even a motion about sports and the interlinking between sports and politics, whether it's a motion about um, how you should use a certain amount of money that you have right now to be able to be. I mean, I think that falls under the stuff that I've already said. So, yeah, I think this is very important for people to know, and I would highly recommend that you guys read up a lot more about Vision 2030. Last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the spec is about security. And okay, so this could be an entire other lecture that I don't want to get into too deep. But um, South, it is quite well known that the Saudi Arabian government has been intervening in Yemen since 26th of March 2015. Um, According to the UNDP, there have probably been almost 400,000 deaths in Yemen. And there's a variety of actors that are considered to be responsible, but chief among them are US and Saudi Arabia. Saudi also started and ended the Qatar blockade in a period of 5 years, when there was a. You should read about the Alula reconciliation. Uh, this is also another thing that you should know, which is about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, who was an American citizen, an American journalist, who was killed in the Istanbul consulate. Um, but it is, again, this is something that's heavily speculated, but it's generally agreed upon to be true that it was the Saudi state that led to his killing. And it's not just that Saudi Arabia has been an aggressor. The Abqaiq Quraysh, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, attack on the 14th of September 2019 disrupted 5.7 million barrels per day of Saudi oil output at the time. Also, a lot of this stuff is not quite important. I think the Yemen conflict is quite important because it involves a variety of different countries. Qatar I've included here because you should know how relations are between different Gulf countries in status quo. This explains why other countries are skeptical of Saudi Arabia, um, but also explains the uh, how much America is willing to tolerate uh, when when it's oil friends doing stuff. Um, but this you should know. I mean, you maybe shouldn't, but you should know that or they are insecure about oil. I mean, of course, more attacks and more instability in the Gulf and more instability in the Middle East is also going to lead to more instability in the ability of the House of Saud to be able to make money, which is true and fair. This is not necessarily exclusive to oil. Of course, they could bomb other stuff. There could be attacks on, I don't know, tourist places and all of that kind of stuff. That's something that's true. But here I've just really included it so that you understand uh, how it's not oil that's vulnerable, but the income sources of South the Saudi Arabian state are quite vulnerable to instability in this region, as is true for many countries in many regions. But last thing is quite important, which is the relations restoration between Saudi Arabia and Iran in March of 2023. This is important for a few reasons. The first reason that this is important is that this deal was brokered by China, even though Saudi Arabia is a known staunch US ally and Iran is very much not. The second thing that's important is that even after this restoration, that did not deter US from taking more anti-Iran action. Um, why, and the third reason why this is important is to kind of try to analyze what is the extent of involvement that China has in the Middle East. I mean, there are rumors. Like I won't say anything very factually. People say that China is already quite involved. People say that China is trying to gain a foothold, and there are very very qualified people on both sides of this argument who make both sides of this argument. Uh, in reality, the reality is probably somewhere between these things. But when it comes to debate, the reason that this is important is to explain that Saudi Arabia can potentially have alternatives when it comes to a superpower country that can ally with them and that can support them in certain things. Of course, the efficacy of those alternatives and whether the alternatives are better than the US or worse than the US, all of these things are up to debate, but this is a direction you can go in. So, this is a bunch of Saudi Arabia spec that would be useful when you're debating Saudi Arabia and when you're debating any country that's near Saudi Arabia. Because even if you don't know much about other countries, let's say Kuwait or Oman or other Gulf countries, what you can do when you know a lot about one Gulf country like Saudi Arabia, and I don't recommend this. I think it's very good to learn as much as you can about as many things as you can. But practically speaking, when you know one country in depth, I mean, or at least you understand um, the incentives of this country and what it wants and like whether it's been able to get it so far or not. You can kind of generalize this to other similar countries and then you can make educated guesses. And this is what equity kind of warns you about, which is don't make vague generalizations, usually between communities and that kind of stuff. Because the problem with generalizations is, of course, they can be offensive and they can hurt people's sentiments, but also that they are logically not um, they're probably not strategic to make because it's very easy for a knowledgeable team to be able to beat a generalization. And if it is revealed in debate that your team made a generalization, then even if you had some good arguments and some good points and a good chance at winning the debate or securing a second, that goes down significantly because people start to believe that you don't really know stuff, you're just making generalizations and stuff. But I do think that, I mean, all that being said, I do think that in a pinch, it is useful to know as much as you can about at least one country in any geopolitically active region so that you can make educated guesses about other things. For example, it would not be incorrect to say that diversification from oil is a priority for Oman. It would not be incorrect to say that diversification from oil and high investment into the tourist economy or tourism economy is a priority for Qatar. So, and these are things that are true. These are actually empirically true things. But you can reach empirically true facts by knowing some parallel empirically true facts and then making educated guesses. But I do think that this is not a substitute for increasing your knowledge and learning as much as you can about the world and the various different types of people that live inside it. But it's useful in a pinch. That's all I'll say. So now we'll come to truth, because this motion is a truth value motion. But the question that you might ask yourself is, what is truth? Again, the motion statement is blah 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 blah. In this case, it's the rise of MBS, but let's just say blah 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 blah. THBT blah 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 has been good for Saudi Arabia. The question is, compared to what? And there are two common ways in which I often see teams defining these motion burdens. The first is that Saudi Arabia is, I mean, Gov would need to prove in this specific binary that Saudi Arabia is now better than it was pre MBS, which means that the binary is now versus then. The second burden is that Saudi Arabia is better than it would have been, again, at the same time in 2026, just without MBS. And here the binary ends up being status quo versus counterfactual, which is that if like Gov defends that MBS specifically had a lot to do with these benefits, and Op says that if MBS had not risen to power, alternative prince, blah blah blah, would have been able to create these same benefits, if not more. How do you choose which one is correct and which one is actually correct? The first thing that I will say, and I promise this is not a cop out, but I do think that at any general tournament, even though this is a motion from Worlds, at any general tournament where you encounter a motion like this, that can plausibly, to the best of your knowledge, have two different binaries, ask cap. When the motion is announced, ask cap. This is what cap clarifications are for. Ask cap, pester them, make sure that, I mean, don't harass them, don't heckle them. But the reason I'm saying pester them is because I don't think, I think a lot of people don't ask cap clarifications because they have a fear of appearing dumb or appearing unknowledgeable about this motion, or appearing unknowledgeable about motion burdens and that kind of stuff. I don't think that, I mean, it's of course a valid fear, but I don't think that it's a strategic fear to have. Um, Sounding dumb is a much, much better outcome than debating on the incorrect binary or the unintentioned binary, or even worse, if you know the correct intention binary or the correct, like, bimanual binary, but the judges don't know it or the other teams don't know it. So when there are two of these binaries that can presumably arise out of the same motion, then you should usually ask cap. In this case, I don't think both of them are. I think, okay, so I'll first give you a TLDR of my thoughts and then I'll explain. So in this motion, I think that this motion has the first burden. So the binary in this debate is actually just to explain that Saudi Arabia is now in a better position than it was pre MBS. Okay, so this is what is the most logical way to interpret the statement that something has been good for Saudi Arabia, because the comparative would be that it has not been good for Saudi Arabia. I mean, the alternate team would try to prove that it has not been good for Saudi Arabia, which means that you are creating a timeline and you are trying to explain that something that happened during this specific period was good or bad. But what I see very, very often in various circuits, especially the Indian circuit, is that teams often try to prove the second claim, which is that Saudi Arabia is better in with MBS than it would have been without MBS. And while that's fair, and probably not completely outside the ambit of this debate, because and this I will explain in the next slide when we talk about how we can actually come up with arguments for these retrospective motions. I don't think that this is the most strategic binary to just choose. Why? The first reason is that the additional burden of what this comparative would have been adds fog without winning the debate. When I say fog, is that it really just makes the debate a lot more unclear, because you're telling basically both teams that you need to prove that if not MBS, someone else, like I don't know, some hypothetical prince SBM would have risen to power. So the first burden that's added to this debate is who would have risen to power, or what the power structure of Saudi Arabia would have been like absent MBS. And this is a big time consuming burden, and also a big source of mech battle in debate, where teams will give reasons for one type of prince, and other teams will give reasons for other types of princes and stuff. But just proving who would have held power in Saudi Arabia itself is not very relevant, because you will still have to come down and end up debating the same harms versus benefits debate. So I don't think that, first off, this is very strategic, and this ends up wasting your time where you could have been coming up with harms and benefits, especially on opening teams. And you waste your time and brain power in thinking instead about who would have been in power and what that would have been like. What that would have been like, that you should think about, but who would have been in power is in this motion maybe not the best use of time to think about. The second reason why this is not maybe the most strategic burden is that it allows for a lot of squirreling. Let's say Gov has proven that MBS's rise led to 4 reforms. Let's say opposition uses Strat 2 and says that if MBS hadn't risen, um, hypothetical Prince SBM would have risen, and his rise would have led to 5 reforms. Maybe Op does this. Has Op really proven that the rise of MBS didn't lead to good? At best, Op has proven that the rise of MBS led to a harm of the opportunity cost of things being better. Does that really mean that the motion statement is false and the motion should fall? I don't think that's true, because like we could say that, well, let's take the example that I gave earlier in this session, okay, which is today I did 2 hours of studying, and this house believes that the 2 hours of studying has been good for me. If following opposition strategy, I mean, or if following the motion burden binary 2 here, Op would say that this studying has not been good for Krishaang, because instead of studying, he could have played outside, and playing outside would have potentially led to better stuff for Krishaang. Like, it could have led to, I don't know, more physical fitness. Like, it could have led to a fun time with your friends and all of that stuff. But they haven't proven that studying didn't lead to good for me. They haven't beaten the benefits of that study. And maybe that is something that they could still do responsibly. But their case itself does not directly engage with the benefits of studying that I have gotten, with the good that studying has specifically done for me. So I think that the first way to define this motion burden is a lot more strategic. And this is why these types of motions are also called retrospective debates or retrospective motions. Um, and I think that if anyone tries to run on the second strategy, you could call them out on it. You could try to pull them back. You could very easily engage on their strategy, but also just know that them running on that strategy reduces their ability to be able to uh, actually deeply engage with the harms and benefits that you're talking about in the round. All right. So I would say strat one is better. I would say that, and I also do think that this is the real burden of the debate. The reason that I have written that this second claim is not completely outside the ambit of this debate is because proving that there is an opportunity cost of a potential benefit is also a harm. I think that is true. So Op can it's not incorrect for Op to say that there could have been a bigger benefit, and losing out on that benefit is a harm. But then they would need to weigh that against the benefits that already exist on Gov of this rise already happening, and then you get back to square one. So I think that it seems like the more easy and intuitive thing to do, because in debate we are we're very biased towards our side of the paradigm, their side of the paradigm, our side, their side, our side, their side, and we try to usually compare two different worlds and explain, oh, our side is better, their side is better. But in this kind of debate and in most retrospective motions, except for, yeah, I mean, in most retrospective motions, it is actually usually about trying to prove that there are things that have already happened as a consequence of this that are good or are bad, as we will see in the next slide. Retrospective case study. This is the biggest purpose of this session, which is how do you go about making and proving a retrospective case, especially in a THBT motion. because the burden on you, if you are defending that the current world with MBS having risen to power is better than the pre MBS rise world, you need to prove that harms or benefits happen. But if you don't know facts, this type of motion can be quite daunting for you, because how do you prove something that you don't know? What should your approach be? I think we can divide this approach a little bit. So the first way that you guys can kind of think of this, not the first way, but the first step that potentially you can use to be able to prove a harm that has already happened or a benefit that has already happened, is actor analysis. And here I don't necessarily just mean MBS. When I talk about an actor, I talk about any entity that had an ability or a disability to be able to make something happen. And this is a conscious entity. I mean, of course, it can be a group, but it had incentives for wanting something to happen. How do you do this? You try to prove that the actor had a reason to want a certain impact, X, okay? And that impact could be a harm, it could be a benefit, but it's X. They really had a reason to want it. Then you try to prove that they had the ability to make it happen. So let me just take a reductive example. A benefit that Gov could talk about is that MBS's rise led to more rights for women. Um, First, we prove incentive. So we say that MBS wanted this, and we explain why MBS wanted more rights for women. He wanted, I don't know, maybe more people from his country to be involved in the workforce. We could say that he wanted more international legitimacy and whatever. You can give a lot of mech. And you can explain why women wanted rights, which is obvious, but you should still explain it in situations when you're debating about conservative countries, because there's a lot of conditioning and internalized misogyny. So that taking these incentives for granted is not very strategic. Once you prove both of these things, that MBS wanted power, MBS wanted women to have more rights, and then MBS got power and he got the capacity to be able to get women more rights. Once you've proven both these parts, it is viable for an average reasonable voter that the rise of MBS led to more rights for women. Because if he wanted something and he had the power to make it happen, then he probably did make it happen. So this is the most simple way to be able to prove a retrospective harm or a benefit. I would say, I will note that the stuff I've written here, these are not lines of proof and should not be mistaken for lines of analysis of proof. These are headings, these are assertions. You need to prove these assertions. You need to prove that MBS probably wanted women to have more rights, and women also wanted to have more rights in a conservative country. You need to prove that when MBS got power, he got some additional capacity as a result of that power, that he was able to get these kinds of policies passed. Because otherwise, you're again open to a lot of symmetricization based attacks by op, or if you're proving a harm, then by gov, to be able to say that, oh, if MBS was so strong, or if MBS really wanted this so much, then he was already a crown prince, or he was already, and even before he was a crown prince, he was quite important, and he had access to a lot of money and a lot of influence. So if he wanted to, he could have made it happen. So you need to explain why he couldn't have made it happen, why this additional power uniquely allowed him to make it happen, right? The second thing that, and the second important consideration when you're proving a retrospective case, is the comparative. And here, if we say that we're following the first type of strategy and the first type of motion burden, then the comparative is temporal. So even if you're not going for strat 2, picking up an explicit comparative of a non-MBS world, it is still important whenever you as Gov try to explain that there is a benefit and there is a good, you need to explain what the need for this benefit is. If you're op, you need to explain how life was good, but MBS ruined it. So, and the reason for this is that if you leave your harms or benefits kind of hanging in the air, first that increases the scope of symmetricization and those kinds of attacks by the other team. But also, and more importantly, I think they are just a lot less persuasive. Because if you don't explain why your benefit is actually creating some kind of margin over what already existed, you're probably not fulfilling the motion burden in the best possible way. Because the motion explicitly asks you to explain what is something new that happened as a consequence of this rise to power, which was good or bad. So you need to focus on the novelty. Not, I mean, if you're closing, of course, you want to have a novel case, but like you need to focus on the novelty of the benefit or the novelty of the harm, and explain either why this benefit or harm did not exist before this, and how this, and if it's a benefit, then why people wanted it, and if it's a harm, why people really, really dreaded it, and it still ended up happening, something like that. So Uh, in simple words, there is a burden on teams to frame why the benefit slash harm didn't or couldn't occur until MBS, and how MBS's rise was, and the best way to prove this is that MBS's rise was a direct cause to that led to this benefit or harm. But the second way that you can say prove this is that at least it was a catalyst and a unique catalyst that led to the ability for this harm to be actualized or the benefit to be actualized. I'll give you a reductive example. Maybe Op can say that the rise of MBS has led to worse policy. Uh, how and why? Because when MBS came to power, MBS centralized authority within the House of Saud, and he reduced the amount of authority that lots and lots of other important people and nobles and a lot of his family members had inside the House of Saud before his rise. He reduced that power and he reduced that authority. Um, this is bad because it took away a check and balance mechanism and led to policies being rushed through. Just explaining this is not enough. You need to go one step further and explain that until MBS, even though it was not a democracy, there was at least stronger filtration of policies because all of these other actors that we're talking about had incentives to act as check and balance mechanisms and filter the best policies through and say no when saying a no was important. So more centralization has led to worse quality policies. Here is why it has led to worse quality. Here is why it has led to bad policies. This would be the first burden. And the second burden is to explain why these are not just bad policies, these are worse quality policies than the policies that used to exist, because the policies that used to exist at least to us to have some level of check and balance. So that's what I mean by explain the comparative. Lastly, I want to talk about how it would be strategic to explain exclusivity. And here is where I might be a little bit of a hypocrite, but I just want to be a little practical. Even if you're not going for Strat 2, which is, if you remember, Strat 2 there, or the burden 2 that we were talking about, was to explain how the rise of only MBS has uniquely been good or bad, as compared to anyone else who could have risen or ruled Saudi Arabia. I still think it is good to go deep into explaining why the exclusivity of why MBS is an important actor and is able to cause something. Why is this why is this something that I'm talking about at all? Because on paper, this actually holds slightly less importance in these retrospective motions. In motions that are worded like this, that this has led to good, or in motions that another very common motion type, which is quite similar, is that THBT X has led to more harm than good. All right. Where a lot of people make the same kind of mistake and are like, oh, what's the comparative? Who else would have come? What harm would they have caused? And stuff. So on paper, maybe this is slightly less important in these types of motions. But in practice, you don't want to be strawmanned by people saying, oh, any non-MBS prince could have also caused. How do you solve for this without completely getting into the battle of who the non-MBS prince would have been and how good they would have been and stuff? The way that you avoid that battle while still avoiding strawmanning is to frame MBS well and explain what makes him different to other people. The first way to do that is to have spec and explain the unique circumstances that led to his rise to power. But let's say you don't have any spec. You can still, even if you lack spec, you can, again, ironically, generalize his traits. So you can think about how a young prince from an Islamic oil economy who grew up watching the death of oil would have thought or would have decided, not decided, but would have formed a personality and an internal decision making calculus. And then you try to describe MBS in as detailed and diverse and distinct terms as you can. So, what are all the different adjectives that you can attach to MBS? What are all the different traits about MBS that you can reasonably ascertain? And what are the limited amount of things that you know about his rise? Because I'm hoping you at least know something. Once you've been able to make a big diverse sentence like this, for example, a young prince from an Islamic oil economy who grew up watching the death of oil. Once you are able to do this, you can chop this sentence up into a bunch of questions, and the plausible, reasonable answers to those questions end up becoming your framing. For example, what does any prince want? What does the head of a religious country want? How does the economic transition change the country? When you grow up watching the death of oil, what is the consequence of that economic transition onto the country, but also onto like your internal decision making calculus? Once you make a bunch of these questions, you will inevitably come up with answers on varying levels of charity to how good of a person you think MBS is. I'm sure there are some viewers who are watching this video who might think that MBS is a saint. Others might think that he's a butcher. The reality is that he's probably somewhere in the middle, maybe more towards one side than the other, but that's up to you to decide. But depending on this, you will be able to come up with a lot of different answers that will be able to answer your framing. What does MBS want? What does this prince want? They probably want legacy, they want respect, they want security, they want love. If you think that they're a good person, you would say that they would want to do right by his people. If you think that he's an evil person, he might want like to get vengeance against his enemies. If he's a practical person, he would want to stay important and not get deposed and all of that stuff. If he's a paranoid person, then he would want this even more. So once you're able to come up with a bunch of these questions, you can answer these questions, and then you're able to explain these things as being unique to MBS somehow. Because even if legacy and the urge for legacy is itself not something that's unique to MBS, the specific sentence that you came up with and the specific combination of traits. So MBS is probably not the only ruler in the world who wants to leave a legacy behind. But he's one of the only rulers in the world who used to have a country that was dependent on oil and now grew up watching the death of oil and stuff. So he might be one of the only rulers in the world who wants legacy, but also simultaneously wants economic security. Economic security in the sense of diversification, of reducing dependence on this, of seeing how suddenly an economic shock could change the attitudes of people in his family and his country, and is something that he would want to avoid. So you make this big sentence, you divide it up into a bunch of questions, and then you come up with answers to those questions and create a unique combination of answers that then becomes your framing for who MBS is, why is MBS important, and why is MBS the biggest reason for why these harms or these benefits actually ended up happening. Lastly, make sure you explain for both the comparative, the temporal comparative and the MBS comparative, the barriers that exist that prevent stuff from happening. Because again, you don't want your opponents to say that, oh, if this was possible and if this is so good, it would have happened anyway. Oh, if this is inevitable, then it wouldn't have been avoided and it would have happened anyway. So whenever you create a harm or you create a benefit, ensure you are explaining that until you create that benefit analytically, there were barriers that existed that prevented that benefit from getting actualized. Until you assert that harm analytically, things were good enough, and that goodness of the world or the check and balances or whatever were barriers that existed that prevented that harm from getting actualized. Do this and you will do very well at retrospective debates. All the best.